19. Promises. There were days Leo remembered because he had no choice, because they were branded on his brain, body, and soul, carved roughly into him by the blunt edge of grief. But there were also days he remembered because he wanted to, because he willed himself to, because if he could accumulate enough of them, they might bury the other ones under their weight or push them to the corners where they could be ignored. Memories of him and Gareth sledding down the hill behind the school and the mugs of marshmallow-laden hot chocolate that followed. Of him and his brother teaming up against their dad, pulling him away from his desk, from his really important work, and wrestling him to the ground, piling all the pillows from every sofa and bed on top of him to make a mountain, and then belly flopping onto the pile, reveling reveling in their dad's laughing, groans coming through from underneath. Memories of his mother stretched out across the blanket in the grass, growing right where it belonged this time. Her head resting on his father's leg, blinking against the sun as the boys abandoned their half-eaten sandwiches to go find a tree to climb. And Sundays spent hiking through the woods, Leo's father carrying an extra bag to pick up trash they found littered along the way. It may not be our trash, he said, but that doesn't mean it's not our responsibility to clean it up. It's for the greater good. Leo's father often spoke of the greater good, some force that impelled a person to do what was best, not for himself, but for everyone else. He said it extended beyond family, beyond home and school, even beyond country and planet, and that all species of a higher intellectual order assumed this responsibility, to look out for one another, to care for each other, to clean up after each other's messes. But it only works if we all believe in it, he said. If we all believed in it, Leo thought, then there wouldn't be trash to pick up to begin with, which meant whoever left the sofa can sitting on the side of the trail was either not of higher intellectual order, or they just plain didn't care. What happens when someone, a person, a species, a planet, decides not to believe? What do you do when the whole galaxy becomes a mess for someone else to clean up? His father would say that you don't give up, that you keep trying, that no dreams are easy to achieve. But Leo knew better. He knew that most people only looked out for their own. Sometimes it seemed that was all you could do. But was it enough? Leo sat at the table, head in hands. He was alone, everyone else in some other part of the ship. Leo assumed they were leaving him on purpose. He was starting to get used to it, being left to fend for himself. It seemed like his whole universe was falling apart. He felt that way before, too. What I am going to tell you will be hard to hear and even harder to believe. Leo didn't know what to believe. Everything was so knotted in his head that any time he tried to follow one line of thought, it crashed into another and splintered off into dozens of contradictory directions. What ifs and could be's and how comes. His father was right. It was hard to believe that the Ikari could do such a thing, allowing the Jarg to decimate cities, to slaughter civilians just so his planet, his people, would fully commit to their war. Hard to believe, but not impossible. Not when you think hummingbirds and cherry blossoms long ago. Not when you think of earthquakes and disappearing beaches. Not when you see the war has reduced people to. The ones stuck in between. The planets and people used up and discarded or simply pushed away and ignored. Then it wasn't so hard to believe at all. Harder for Leo to believe that his father was gone again after being this close to getting him back. That after everything, Leo was right back where he started, on board a pirate ship, with his family scattered to the stars. He leaned across the table, turned the watch dial to 12, and the projection shot across the cramped dining area of the Icarus, revealing the familiar porch and blade of grass and puzzled look, followed by the fleeting smile, the one he'd never see again, not for real. Leo put his head against the cool metal table. The anger swelled within him, as it had so many times before, but he no longer knew where to direct it. Yes, it was a Jark missile that took her, but it was the Ikari's cold and calculated decision to let it, and Leo's fault for not insisting that she come with him that day. Nothing good ever comes from leaving the ones you love behind. I see you. You okay there, Ninja Turtle? Leo startled, switching off the projection and tucking his hands behind the table as if he'd been doing something wrong. Baz stood in the doorway, hands shoved into his pockets. He had changed back into his flip-flops and wore a new t-shirt with an obscene set of ruby lips and a giant tongue lolling out. A gauzy white bandage stuck to the side of his head, a rust-colored spot at its center. The captain had lost most of his left ear to the blast back at the Jarek hangar. Of course, the Ikari probably could grow and graft a new one on easily enough, except that they were the ones who had shot it off. Leo wiped at his eyes. All good, he said with a sigh. If you ever think about becoming an outlaw, you'll definitely need to work on lying. Baz took the opposite seat and pointed to the bowl sitting still on the table from last time. You gonna eat that? Leo looked at the leftover gyrt, shook his head, and slid it toward the captain. Unlike Gareth, Baz didn't slide it back. He choked down one bite and then torpedoed the spoon back into the bowl. The only thing worse than gyrt, cold gyrt, he said, making a face, but following it with a smile. Though strangely, it kind of reminds me of chili dogs. You remember chili dogs? Leo nodded. His father would buy them for him and Gareth when they went to watch the Rockies play. Chili dogs and popcorn and giant sodas, enough to make even Dev the double-crossing jacker jealous. I miss chili dogs, Baz mused, and salsa, with a big bag of crisp, salty tortilla chips. Double bacon cheeseburgers, Leo said, his mouth starting to water, with fries and ketchup. Loads of ketchup, Baz agreed, and watermelon, thick slices, juice dripping off your chin. Oranges, too. Not so much eating them, but the smell. Leo nodded. For some things, the smell was really all he remembered. Fresh-baked cookies, Leo said, right out of the oven. Mown grass. Campfires. Baz took a long, steady breath through his nose, eyes shut, perhaps going back to the last time he'd sat around a fire. When he opened them again, he still looked far away, but then he found his focus. We could go on like this forever, you know. Won't change anything. Still going to be looking at a bowl of cold gyrt. Leo tucked his chin into his folded arms. Yeah, but I can't help it sometimes. Me either. The captain reached up and touched his bandage, gently tracing the arc of the blood stain with one finger. Does it hurt? Baz shrugged. No more than any others. There's really only like a third or of an ear left. Cat says I'll finally look like a real pirate. He laughed at his own joke. I should say thanks, by the way, for what you did back there. If it weren't for you, we'd all be in the Jarek prison ship right now, and there's no telling what body parts I'd be missing. Leo shrugged. You would have done the same for me. You so sure about that? Baz asked, but the look in the pirate's eyes told Leo that he was right. Yeah, probably. Baz took up his spoon again, slowly stirring in the rim of the bowl, like a planet orbiting its sun. Billions of planets, billions of suns. How much did any of them really matter? Only the ones with Ventasium in them? And when they were all gone, then what? Do this for me, Leo. It could mean the world. We tried, Leo. You tried. There was no way you could have known. Do you think it's true? Leo asked. What my father said? About what happened that day? About the attack? Baz had been there, after all. He had seen it. Days later, he had signed up to avenge it, like thousands of others. He once wore the same patch as the one in Leo's pocket. The medal, the one Leo had furtively returned to Baz's trunk rather than keeping it, was proof. Though it was also proof that the captain had his doubts long before today. Are you asking me if I believe the Ikari lied to us, letting those missiles hit so that they could use us? Because you already know my answer. The Ikari have been using us from the moment they showed up. You, me, your dad, all of us. Fueling their ships and fighting their war, and all for the promises they don't intend to keep. They're really no better than their enemies, and we're all fools for joining their coalition. Baz tugged on his unbandaged ear, almost as if to verify that it was still there. That was still half right. At least with the Jarek, you knew what you were up against, though I wish I knew what it was that they needed your father for. Whatever it is, I'm not sure I want to be around to see it. Leo reached into his pocket, technically Cat's pocket, removing what he had hidden there and settling it on the table. Maybe this will tell us, he said. Okay, let's see what this is all about. They were back in the cockpit, the whole crew, gathered to see what Leo's father had given him. Baz clicked the data chip into place, and for a moment there was nothing. Then, Dr. Calvin Fender appeared from the waist up. Leo shivered, looking at the image on his screen. His father looked more like a ghost, a flickering apparition of himself. Leo could tell by the clothes and the beard that this had been recorded in the last day or two. while he was being held prisoner by the Jark. No, not prisoner, partner. Leo stared at his father's image, waiting for some explanation or apology, something directed at him, but what followed wasn't even meant for Leo. This message is for Zirkus Crate, the recording began. My name is Dr. Calvin Fender. For the past 3 years, I have been stationed aboard the Coalition vessel Beagle, ostensibly searching for potential sources of EL-486, though in reality, I have been working on ways to refine it in order to increase its power. 5 days ago, I was taken prisoner by the Jark Empire and coerced into helping them instead. As a result, I have learned that the Jark are on the verge of weaponizing EL-486 on a scale like never before, developing a way to destabilize the element within planets themselves, resulting in massive release of uncontrolled energy. With such a weapon at their disposal, the Jark could destroy any planet where the element is found, including my own home of Earth. The Jark intended to use this weapon to try and end the world, but I fear the cost of lives in the galaxy wide would be too great. I believe that there has to be another way. Included on this data chip is all the research I have been able to gather. I believe you are our best chance, of countering this new threat. I'm afraid of what might happen if this information falls into anyone else's hands, including the Ikari. I'm also afraid we don't have much time. Though I may be able to stall them, I believe the Jark's development of this weapon is inevitable. My only hope is that you will find a way to stop it, to succeed where I cannot. Please, for the sake of Earth and for every planet that is unwittingly drawn into this terrible war, I am begging for your help. With a buzz of static, the ghost of Dr. Calvin Fender disappeared. The crew of the Icarus stared into the empty space left behind. Skits whistled. Well, that's a kick in the treads. Taking out entire planets, entire populations? Boo said. That's monstrous, even for the Jark. Is it really hard to believe? The crew turned to their captain, bandaged and bruised, the purple bloom on his cheek outlined with a corona of yellow. I mean, what's the difference? How is this anything new? Jark, Ikari, bombs, drills. It all comes out to the same in the end, doesn't it? Maybe this is different, Leo said, pointing to the data chip. You heard what my father said. Maybe this Zirkus Crate knows how to stop it. Right, Skid said. One guy is going to find a way to stop the entire Jark Empire from blowing up the galaxy. We don't know who this crate person is or where to find him. Yeah, maybe not the first part, Kat said, tapping the screen, scrolling through the data files, images, and blueprints. Most of this technical diagram specs is all beyond me. But this last part here, she tapped on a file with the maps appeared alongside a set of coordinates. It's pretty far. We might not even have enough juice to jump there and back. Not that we can't get more if we need to. Leo knew what she meant. They were pirates, after all. So we go there and deliver this ship to Zirkus Crate. What about Leo's brother? Boo asked. Aren't we going to try and find him too? And let's not forget all the people who want us dead, Skits added, helpfully. The Jark, the Ikari, Grimsley, your ex-girlfriend. Wherever we go, somebody's bound to catch up to us. And the Icarus isn't in the best shape, Kat said. If we don't patch her up soon, there might not be the ability to catch up to. Leo watched the captain's fingers tap, tap, tap. You know what a good pirate would do, he mused, talking to no one in particular? He'd sell this data chip directly to the Coalition. Something like top-secret intel. The Ikari would pay a fortune. More than enough to buy a little hole in the wall somewhere far off everyone's radar. Hang up our guns, change our robes, spend the rest of our days serving drinks and mopping vomit off the floor. That's something a good pirate would do, Kat echoed. The question is, what are we going to do? We're kind of caught up in this now, Baz. She glanced at Leo, and I mean all of us. Do this for me, Leo. It could mean the world. His father didn't just mean any world. He meant their world. He meant Earth, home of chili jogs and Charizards, Miguel Ramos, and home of scripted television and fast food restaurants and ponds with ducks and real-life trees, home to families with wooden signs on their doors. Bastion Black drummed on his knee, lost in the rhythm of his own thoughts. You want to know how you can get away with being the worst pirate in the universe? Leo had to guess. Probably something about making it up as you go along, or knowing how to make a quick getaway, somehow leaving with even less than you started with. But it turned out Leo didn't know everything there was to know about pirates yet. The key is having the best crew, Baz said. Then he called for a vote. Leo stood in the cockpit and looked out at the stars. After their unanimous decision, the crew of the Icarus scattered to the other parts of the ship. Boo was already rattling the bunks with his snoring, recovering from his banshee-like scream that had clearly taken too much out of him. Cat was in the cargo hold, eating the last of the Twinkies and taking inventory, an easy job given how low the Icarus was on supplies. Skits was finally finishing her repairs to the engine's cooling system. Some terrible song Leo was just barely recognized belting through her speakers. In Baz, when Leo passed his quarters, he was sitting on his bed, open treasure trunk at his feet, a shiny silver medal in his hand. Leo considered interrupting, asking him if he was okay, but thought better of it and left Bastion Black alone with his memories. Sometimes you can't help but think about how things used to be. Instead, he wandered to the front of the ship, still using Cat's jacket to keep out the chill. He stood and stared into the never-ending darkness, stippled with thousands of stars, and he didn't even know the names of. Forming constellations his father never taught him, because the night sky seen from Earth is just one of infinite number of patterns in the universe can take. Leo really detested space. Too much uncertainty, too easy to lose your way, and so much distance between the things that mattered. He had no idea how far he was, from Gareth, from his father, from Earth. The space that separated them may as well have been infinite. But then Leo thought of his mother. An early morning making pancakes, he pictured her, pointing first to her head and then to his heart. "I'll find you, Leo," whispered into the canvas of stars. Somehow they would find each other, and maybe, finally, they would find a home. To be continued.